The abandoned east wing of the Imperial Palace was an absolute nightmare of structural degradation. I stood in the shadows of the grand empty hall, tapping my specialized iron mallet against a cracked pillar. The dull, hollow thud that echoed back made me wince. The mortar was disintegrating, compromised by 3 decades of neglected water damage. The entire roof was essentially being held up by stubbornness and a few desperately overstressed pine crossbeams. I pulled a small scroll from my tool belt and made a harsh, angry slash with my charcoal stick. It was my 4th structural safety violation of the morning, and no one in the Ministry of Public Works was going to read it. I was currently calculating the exact shear force required to bring the ceiling down when the heavy wooden doors at the end of the hall were pushed open. I immediately ducked behind the thickest part of the pillar. The east wing had been condemned for 5 years. Absolutely no one was supposed to be in here. 5 men slipped into the hall. They did not wear the standard bronze armor of the palace guard. They wore matte black iron, designed specifically to absorb light rather than reflect it. At their center was a man who moved with the terrifying, absolute silence of a falling shadow. Lord Huan, the master of the siege. Even isolated in the outer walls, I knew who he was. He was the Emperor's vanguard commander, a man tasked with tearing down the walls of the dynasty's enemies. He was massive, his broad shoulders cloaked in dark wolf fur, his face a sharp, unforgiving mask of cold authority. He carried a heavy spiked mace at his hip that looked heavy enough to shatter a horse's skull. "This wall will suffice." Lord Huan's voice was a deep, resonating rumble that seemed to vibrate directly through the stone floor. He gestured toward the western wall of the hall. "Plant the charges. I want to see if the new black powder mixture can shatter solid granite without a localized fire." His men moved instantly, pulling small, heavy canvas sacks from their belts and packing them tightly against the base of the western wall. I stared at them from the shadows, my blood turning instantly to ice. They were placing explosives on the western wall. The western wall, the only structural element in the entire hall that was currently holding the decaying weight of the central roof arch. The lieutenant struck a flint, the sparks catching the edge of a slow-burning fuse. "Stop!" I screamed, abandoning my cover entirely and sprinting out from behind the pillar. The siege specialists drew their blades in a fraction of a second, but Lord Huan simply raised a single, heavily gauntlet hand. The men froze. Huan turned slowly, his dark, piercing eyes locking onto me with the lethal intensity of a hawk spotting a field mouse. "And what?" Lord Huan asked softly, the danger in his voice absolute. "Is a palace servant doing in a condemned wing?" "I am an infrastructure inspector," I snapped, entirely ignoring the 4 drawn swords as I marched straight up to the hissing fuse and stomped my heavy leather boot firmly down on it, extinguishing the spark. I glared up at the massive siege master. "And you are about to commit suicide by architectural ignorance." The lieutenant bristled, raising his sword. "Insolence! You dare speak to the Lord of the Siege?" "I don't care if he's the Lord of the Heavens," I interrupted, pointing my iron mallet aggressively at the canvas sacks of black powder. "If you detonate a breaching charge on that specific wall, you will compromise the primary load path of the entire structure. The compressive stress from the roof will instantly transfer to these 4 rotting center pillars, which have a current tensile strength of absolutely 0. The roof will not just fall. It will violently implode inward. You will all be crushed beneath 60 tons of Ming-era masonry." The hall fell dead silent. The siege specialist looked at me as if I had just spoken in a demonic tongue. Lord Huan stared down at me. The cold, empty authority in his eyes slowly shifted into a dark, razor-sharp intrigue. He looked at the wall, then up at the rotting crossbeams and finally back down to me. "You calculated the roof weight," Huan murmured, stepping closer until he towered over me. He smelled of cold iron and crushed pine needles. "Just by looking at it?" "I don't need to look at it, I can hear the wood groaning from the sheer stress," I huffed, pulling my charcoal stick from my belt. I knelt on the dusty stone floor, furiously sketching out the structural diagram of the hall. "Here is the load distribution," I explained, drawing swift, precise arrows. "If you want to test your powder without collapsing the roof, you need to target a non-bearing curtain wall. Move your charges exactly 12 feet to the left, beneath the decorative archway. It will shatter the granite, but the kinetic shockwave will bypass the main support beams." I stood up, brushing the dust from my knees. I pointed my charcoal stick directly at Huan's armored chest. 12 feet to the left. Not an inch less, or you will have a lot of explaining to do to the imperial coroner. Lord Huan did not blink. He looked at the chalk diagram on the floor, the geometry flawless and undeniable. A slow, genuinely terrifying smile spread across his sharp face. "Move the charges 12 feet to the left," Juan commanded, his dark eyes never leaving mine. His men scrambled to obey. I crossed my arms, stepping back to a safe minimum safe distance perimeter I had established in my head. Juan stepped back to stand directly beside me. The fuse was relit. We waited in silence. Boom! The explosion was deafening. Dust and debris exploded outward, the shockwave rattling my teeth. But when the smoke cleared, the result was exactly as I had promised. A massive, jagged hole had been violently punched through the granite of the curtain wall. Above us, the rotting roof beams did not even shudder. Juan looked at the perfectly executed breach, then slowly turned his head to look down at me. The sheer, possessive hunger in his gaze made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "You are not a masonry inspector," Juan stated, his voice a low, heavy purr. "I am Lin Yao," I said, lifting my chin. "My father was the grand architect." Recognition flashed in his eyes. The man who designed the Grand Canal locks. He was executed when the southern bridge collapsed. The bridge collapsed because the provincial governor sourced substandard river clay for the foundation bricks to skim silver off the top, I corrected coldly, my grip tightening on my mallet. My father's schematics were flawless. Juan took a slow step toward me, entirely invading my personal space. The sheer heat radiating off his dark armor was staggering. "I have been ordered to march on the Iron Citadel in the north," Juan murmured, leaning down so his face was level with mine. "It is a fortress built into the side of a mountain. My siege engineers tell me it is structurally impossible to breach without a 5-year starvation blockade." "There is no such thing as an impossible breach," I replied, the professional engineer in me rising to the challenge despite the terrifying proximity of the man. "Every structure has a weak point. A flaw in the foundation, a miscalculated arch, a blind spot in the load distribution." Juan's dark eyes locked onto my lips for a fraction of a second before rising to meet my gaze. "Pack your drafting tools, Lin Yao," the master of the siege whispered, his voice leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "You are coming to the front lines with me. We are going to tear a mountain down." Chapter 2. The Imperial Vanguard's war camp was not a place for civil servants. It was a sprawling, violently efficient city of dark canvas and sharpened steel, smelling of wood smoke, horse sweat and weapon oil. I sat at the end of a massive, heavily scarred wooden table inside the primary command tent. I was clutching my leather satchel of drafting tools so tightly my knuckles were white. Surrounding me were the highest-ranking generals of the Eastern Army and Lord Juan's 3 master siege engineers, elderly, bearded men with chests covered in campaign medals who looked at me as if I were a particularly offensive stain on their blueprints. "My lord, this is highly irregular," the head engineer, Master Kwong, sputtered, his face turning a dangerous shade of plum. He slammed a heavy fist onto the table. "You bring a disgraced masonry inspector into the war council? A woman? We are planning the breach of the Iron Citadel, not redesigning a decorative courtyard fountain." Lord Juan sat at the head of the table. He had removed his heavy wolf fur cloak, revealing the dark, terrifyingly efficient lines of his combat armor. He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression an absolute, impenetrable mask of cold authority. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Master Kwong," Juan rumbled, the sheer weight of his voice instantly silencing the entire tent. "You have spent 3 weeks and 4,000 taels of imperial silver calculating a bombardment strategy for the Iron Citadel, and you have produced nothing but excuses regarding the elevation." Lady Lin stopped my men from burying themselves under a roof in 10 seconds flat. "I am introducing a new variable." Juan shifted his dark, predatory gaze down the length of the table until it locked onto me. The challenge in his eyes was unmistakable. "Show them." I didn't cower. I unclasped my satchel and pulled out my iron drafting compass, a piece of charcoal, and a perfectly weighted plumb line. I stood up, walked to the center of the table, and looked down at Master Kwong's massive, highly detailed map of the Iron Citadel's mountain approach. I studied their plotted bombardment lines for exactly 30 seconds. A harsh, involuntary laugh escaped my lips. "You think this is amusing, girl?" Kwong snarled, his hand drifting toward his ceremonial dagger. "I think you are going to accidentally execute your own infantry, Master Kwong," I replied smoothly, ignoring his threat entirely. I picked up my charcoal and drew a sharp, aggressive line completely across his meticulously painted siege lines. "What are you doing to my map?" Kwang shouted. "Correcting a fatal mathematical oversight," I said, tapping the charcoal against the elevation lines of the mountain. "You have calculated the launch trajectory of your heavy trebuchets based on a standard flat plane engagement. But the iron citadel sits on a steep incline. You are firing uphill." I pushed Kwang's decorative wooden markers aside and began to write the formal parabolic trajectory equation directly onto the expensive silk map. The generals stared at the complex variables in absolute, bewildered silence. "In a standard siege, your vertical displacement y is 0 when the payload hits the ground," I explained, speaking with the rapid, unyielding cadence of a professor lecturing a room of failing students. "But here your target, the citadel's outer wall, is elevated. Therefore, y is a positive integer. If you use your current launch velocity v and your standard release angle theta, your payload will not reach the apex of the wall." I dropped the charcoal, looking directly at the furious head engineer. "Your 90-pound flaming boulders will strike the sheer cliff face directly beneath the fortress," I stated, the brutal reality of the physics ringing out in the quiet tent. "The kinetic impact will trigger a massive rockslide, which will pour directly down the mountain and crush Lord Huan's vanguard while they are attempting to scale the lower pass. You aren't breaching a wall, Master Kwang. You are digging a mass grave." The silence in the command tent was absolute. The generals looked at the math, then at the map, then at the steep, undeniable elevation lines they had completely failed to factor into their ballistics. Master Kwang opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. The syntax of the physics was flawless. At the head of the table, Lord Huan let out a low, dark chuckle. It was a terrifying sound, rich and heavy, vibrating with a profound, unapologetic satisfaction. The siege master uncrossed his arms and leaned forward, resting his heavy elbows on the table. He didn't look at his humiliated engineers. His dark, burning gaze was fixed entirely on me. "A mass grave," Huan repeated, his lips curving into a lethal smile. "It seems my current engineering corps is attempting to assassinate me." "It's gross negligence, not assassination, my lord," I corrected, tapping my compass against my palm. "But the casualty rate is mathematically identical." Huan stood up, his massive frame instantly dominating the space. He walked slowly around the table, the heavy tread of his boots making the generals instinctively pull back in their chairs. He stopped directly beside me. The scent of cold iron and pine wrapped around me, a sudden heavy anchor in the center of the hostile room. "General Ma," Huan commanded, not breaking eye contact with me. "Yes, my lord," the vanguard commander barked, jumping to attention. "Confiscate Master Kwang's blueprints and have him escorted to the rear supply train. He is demoted to calculating grain rations for the horses," Huan ordered ruthlessly. He reached out, his large, calloused hand coming to rest lightly on the edge of my work table, his arm caging me in slightly. "Lady Lin," the siege master murmured, his voice dropping to a low octave meant only for my ears, "is officially promoted to chief engineer of the Imperial Vanguard. You have absolute authority over the siege engines. Anyone who questions her math answers to my mace." I looked up into his dark eyes, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. I had expected a military tribunal. Instead, I had just been handed the keys to the most destructive arsenal in the Yen dynasty. "I will need to completely rebuild the trebuchet counterweights to adjust the theta angle," I noted, my voice trembling slightly, though I fought to keep it strictly professional. "It will require requisitioning all the iron from the local blacksmiths." "Take the iron," Huan whispered, leaning down just a fraction closer, his gaze dropping to my lips before rising back to meet my eyes with a fierce, burning intensity. "Take whatever you need, Lin Yao. Just break that fortress for me." Chapter 3. The promotion from disgraced masonry inspector to chief engineer of the Vanguard did not come with a private pavilion or silk robes. It came with a sprawling, dirt-floored engineering tent located dangerously close to the Vanguard's front lines, filled with half-constructed siege engines and incredibly foul-mouthed carpenters. I didn't care. For the first time since my father's execution, I had a drafting table, unlimited resources, and a structural problem that actually mattered. I was currently standing on the wooden crossbeam of a massive, half-built trebuchet, 20 feet in the air. I was covered in sawdust and grease, holding a heavy iron plumb line to check the precise vertical alignment of the throwing arm. "The fulcrum is off by 3 degrees. I shouted down to the team of carpenters below. If we launch a 90-pound payload with this alignment, the shear force will snap the axle on the first rotation, loosen the starboard housing and shim the brace. Lady Lynn, it's cast iron, the foreman yelled back, wiping sweat from his brow. We can't just shim it like a wobbly table. Then file the housing until it sits flush. I snapped, wiping a streak of grease across my forehead. The physics do not care about your schedule, foreman. A 3-degree variance means the payload will deviate 20 yards to the right upon release. At that trajectory, we won't hit the Citadel gates. We'll hit our own Archer battalions. Do as she commands. A dark, resonant voice echoed through the bustling construction yard. The entire crew instantly dropped their tools and fell to their knees. I looked down. Standing at the base of the massive siege engine was Lord Juan. He was not wearing his heavy armor. Instead, he wore a dark sleeveless leather tunic that exposed the terrifying corded muscle of his arms and the jagged faded scars of a dozen campaigns. He didn't look at the kneeling carpenters. He tilted his head back, his dark eyes locking onto me where I stood balanced precariously on the high crossbeam. The vanguard marches for the mountain pass at dawn, Juan called up to me, his voice carrying effortlessly over the noise of the camp. Will the engines be ready? They will be mathematically perfect, my lord, I called back, securing the plumb line to my belt. I grabbed the heavy climbing rope hanging from the crossbeam. I didn't wait for a ladder. I gripped the thick hemp rope with both hands, wrapping my legs around it, and slid the 20 feet to the ground in a swift, controlled descent. I landed lightly in the dirt just a few feet from Juan, dusting off my hands. The carpenters, who had spent the last 3 days watching me scramble over the massive machines like a squirrel, did not react. Lord Juan, however, watched my descent with a dark, heavy intensity that made the air suddenly feel very thick. You move like a scout, not a scribe, Juan murmured as I stepped closer. An architect who cannot climb her own scaffolding is useless, I replied, grabbing a rag from my belt to wipe the grease from my hands. I have recalibrated the counterweights for the elevation angle. The payload trajectory will now clear the cliff face and strike the outer walls of the citadel directly. Juan looked past me at the massive, terrifying silhouette of the completed trebuchet. And will it break the wall? I paused, tossing the rag onto a nearby workbench. I turned to face him, the professional engineer completely taking over. No, I said bluntly. Juan's gaze snapped back to me, his eyes narrowing slightly. Explain. The Iron Citadel was built by the ancient mountain clans, I said, moving to my drafting table and unrolling a rough sketch of the fortress I had compiled from scout reports. The outer wall is not constructed of standard masonry blocks. It is carved directly from the living granite of the mountain face. It is a continuous solid mass. It has no mortar joints to shatter. A 90-pound boulder fired from a trebuchet will not break it. It will simply bounce off, creating a lot of noise and zero structural damage. Juan stepped closer, resting his heavy hand on the edge of the drafting table, leaning in to look at the sketch. Then my siege engines are useless. Conventional siege engines are useless against a solid granite face, I corrected, tapping the charcoal against the sketch. But the wall is only the defense. The vulnerability is the gate. I drew a circle around the massive dark iron doors at the center of the citadel's approach. The gates are solid iron, 10 inches thick, Juan noted, his voice low, his arm brushing against mine as he leaned over the table. My battering rams will splinter before they dent the metal. I am not going to batter them, I murmured, my mind already running the calculations for thermal expansion. I am going to melt them. Juan turned his head to look at me, his face inches from mine. The sheer, terrifying proximity of him made my heart skip a beat, but I forced myself to maintain eye contact. Your men captured a cache of syndicate black powder. Yes? I asked, my voice dropping to a rapid, focused whisper. I don't need it to explode. I need it to burn. I am going to redesign the trebuchet payloads. Instead of solid stone, I am going to build hollow clay spheres. Pack them with the powder, raw sulfur and pitch. I pointed to the gate on the schematic. We launched the incendiary spheres in a concentrated volley directly at the iron doors. The clay shatters on impact, the pitch sticks to the metal, and the powder ignites. We create a sustained, concentrated thermal event. Juan stared at me, the terrifying brilliance of the strategy clicking into place. You want to heat the iron. I want to superheat it, I said, a fierce, unapologetic grin breaking across my face. If we raise the temperature of the iron doors rapidly, the metal will expand within the granite frame. The frame cannot expand. The iron will buckle under its own thermal stress, warping outward. The locking mechanisms will literally shear themselves off the hinges. Juan looked at my soot-stained face, my grease-covered hands, and the brilliant, devastating mathematics laid out on the table. The cold, ruthless master of the siege did not just look impressed. He looked utterly, dangerously captivated. He slowly reached out, his calloused thumb gently wiping a smudge of sawdust from my cheekbone. His touch was shockingly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence he commanded. "You are a terrifying woman, Lin Yao," Juan whispered, his dark eyes burning with an intense possessive heat. "Build your incendiary payload. We burn the gates tomorrow." Chapter 4. The Iron Citadel did not look like a fortress. It looked like a geographic anomaly, carved directly into the sheer face of a towering granite mountain. It was a monument to defensive isolation. At its base, wedged into a narrow rocky gorge, were the massive towering black iron gates. The vanguard's war drums echoed through the frozen canyon, a slow, terrifying rhythmic heartbeat. I stood on a raised wooden command platform directly behind the siege lines, wrapped heavily in a fur-lined cloak Lord Juan had personally draped over my shoulders before we marched. Below us, the massive trebuchets were lined up in perfect, mathematically precise intervals. Instead of solid boulders, the leather slings held my newly designed payloads. Massive sealed clay spheres packed tightly with black powder, sulfur, and raw pitch. Lord Juan stood beside me, his heavy black armor absorbing the pale morning light. His hand rested casually on the pommel of his mace, his dark eyes fixed on the impenetrable iron doors of the citadel. The vanguard infantry waited in perfect, tense formation, shields raised, waiting for a breach that military history deemed impossible. "The wind is blowing steadily through the gorge, dropping the ambient temperature to near freezing," Juan noted, his voice a low rumble. "Will the fire catch?" "The cold is exactly what we need," I replied, stepping up to the edge of the platform and pulling my notes from my satchel. "The thermal shock will be catastrophic. The physics of linear expansion dictate that the change in the metal's structure is governed by a linear thermal expansion. If we rapidly introduce a concentrated heat source exceeding 1000 degrees Celsius against freezing iron, the metal will attempt to expand outward. But because it is bolted into unyielding granite, it has nowhere to go." I looked up at him, a fierce rush of adrenaline overriding the biting cold. "It will tear itself apart." Juan's lips curved into a dark, entirely predatory smile. He didn't look at his generals. He looked at me, giving me the ultimate authority over the Emperor's vanguard. "Fire at will, Chief Engineer," the siege master commanded softly. I raised my arm high into the air, making sure the foreman at the center trebuchet could see me, and snapped my hand down. "Release." The massive wooden throwing arm snapped upward with a deafening crack. The air filled with the screech of straining ropes and groaning timber. 3 heavy clay spheres launched into the sky, tracing a perfect, flawless parabolic arc over the gorge. They did not hit the cliff face. They did not fall short. They struck the center of the massive black iron gates with absolutely devastating precision. The clay shattered instantly, spreading the sticky pitch and raw sulfur directly across the metal. The friction and the black powder ignited in a fraction of a second. A massive roaring sheet of white-hot fire erupted against the citadel doors. The heat was so intense I could feel the wave of it wash over the command platform hundreds of yards away. "Reload!" I shouted over the roar of the flames. "Target the hinges. Keep the thermal output sustained." Volley after volley rained down upon the gates. The iron doors began to change color. First a dull, angry orange, then a bright, terrifying cherry red. The thick black smoke billowed up the cliff face, choking the citadel defenders on the high walls. For 10 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. The vanguard held its breath. Master Kwang, standing in the rear with the supply wagons, looked on with a smug, vindictive sneer, expecting my physics to fail. Then the mountain screamed. It was a sound I will never forget. A high-pitched, agonizing screech of superheated metal warping under impossible stress. The massive iron doors, glowing white-hot in the center, began to bulge violently outward. The granite frame held firm, forcing the expanding iron to buckle inward upon itself. With a sound like a thunderclap, the primary locking bar, thicker than a man's torso, simply sheared in half. The massive right door tore free from its upper hinge, the iron rivets popping like deadly shrapnel, and collapsed outward into the snow with an earth-shattering crash, sending a plume of steam and ash 50 feet into the air. The impenetrable iron citadel was wide open. A stunned, Absolute silence fell over the vanguard. Even the hardened generals stared at the glowing ruined gates in pure shock. Lord Huan did not hesitate. He drew his heavy spiked mace, the steel catching the fiery light of the burning gates. He turned to me, the terrifying violence of the siege master fully unleashed, but his eyes were filled with a burning, absolute reverence. "You broke the mountain, Lin Yao," Huan roared over the crackle of the flames, his voice vibrating with dark triumph. He grabbed the back of my neck, pulling me forward to press a hard, fierce kiss to my forehead before turning toward his army. "Vanguard!" Huan's voice thundered across the gorge, shattering the silence. "To the breach! Leave no man standing!" The war horns blasted. 10,000 men roared in unison, surging forward into the gorge like a tidal wave of dark steel. Huan leaped from the command platform, his heavy boots hitting the snow as he joined the front line of the charge. But before he vanished into the smoke and chaos of the breach, the terrifying master of the siege looked back over his shoulder, his dark eyes locking onto mine through the falling ash. The battle belonged to him, but the victory was already ours. Chapter 5. The battle for the Iron Citadel was brutal, but it was remarkably short. Once the impenetrable iron gates were reduced to warped, glowing scrap metal, the psychological advantage of the defending rebels shattered entirely. Lord Huan's vanguard flooded the gorge, a tide of highly disciplined, heavily armored executioners that swept through the lower courtyards with terrifying efficiency. By midday, the imperial banners were flying from the highest granite spires of the mountain. I did not wait for an engraved invitation. The moment the primary courtyard was secured, I gathered my satchel, my iron mallet, and my chalk, and marched straight through the smoldering ruins of the gates. The interior of the citadel was an architectural marvel, carved seamlessly into the heart of the mountain. But as I stepped into the cavernous Great Hall, where Lord Huan was currently receiving the surrender of the surviving rebel lieutenants, my professional awe was instantly replaced by a sharp, creeping dread. The vanguard infantry was massing in the center of the massive room, hundreds of men in heavy iron armor standing in tight formations. I walked toward the edge of the formation, my boots crunching on the debris. I stopped frowning. I pressed the toe of my boot firmly against one of the massive granite flagstones. I felt a vibration, a very faint, highly unnatural tremor. I dropped to my knees, entirely ignoring the chaotic military proceedings happening 50 feet away. I pulled out my iron mallet and struck the center of the flagstone. It didn't ring with the solid, dull thud of stone resting on earth. It echoed with a hollow, resonant ping. "There is a sub-level," I muttered to myself, brushing a layer of soot away to examine the mortar lines. What I saw made the blood freeze in my veins. A jagged network of micro-fissures was rapidly propagating across the grout, spreading outward from the center of the room like a spiderweb. The rebels hadn't just surrendered. They had prepared a final, devastating spite trap. They had undermined the support pillars in the sublevel directly beneath the Great Hall. My mind instantly flooded with the terrifying syntax of structural failure. The granite floor was no longer resting on solid pillars. It was acting as an unsupported continuous beam, holding the weight of nearly 500 armored soldiers. For a uniformly distributed load, the bending moment M increases exponentially as the unsupported span L widens, governed by the equation for maximum bending moment. If the rebels had knocked out the central pillars, the effective span L had just doubled. That meant the bending moment on the stone had quadrupled. I calculated the bending stress in my head. Granite has incredible compressive strength, but its tensile strength is brittle and highly unforgiving. The stone was currently bowing under a sheer force it was never designed to hold. It was going to fail, and it was going to fail in seconds. "Lord Huan!" I screamed, my voice tearing through the cavernous hall, echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. At the far end of the room, Huan paused mid-sentence. His dark, lethal eyes snapped toward me instantly, tracking my voice through the sea of armored men. I scrambled to my feet, pointing my mallet frantically at the floor beneath his men. "The floor is unsupported. It's a deadfall. Clear the center. Get to the perimeter bearing walls now." A standard general might have hesitated. He might have asked for clarification, or looked at the solid-seeming stone in confusion. But Lord Huan was not a standard general, and he trusted my math more than his own eyes. "Vanguard! Fall back to the walls!" Huan roared, his voice hitting the room like a physical shockwave. "Scatter! Move!" The discipline of the Shadow Guards saved their lives. They didn't question the order. They broke formation instantly, sprinting toward the solid granite edges of the great hall. Juan didn't run for the walls. He sprinted directly toward me. He crossed the distance with terrifying speed, his dark armor a blur against the gray stone. Just as he reached me, a deafening catastrophic crack split the air. The micro fissures connected. The bending stress hit its absolute limit, and the center of the great hall simply ceased to exist. A massive 50-foot section of the granite floor imploded inward, plunging into a pitch-black abyss below. A cloud of thick, choking dust exploded upward as tons of stone collapsed into the undermined sublevel. I stumbled backward as the edge of the floor crumbled beneath my boots. I lost my footing, falling toward the jagged lip of the newly formed crater. Before gravity could claim me, a massive ironclad arm wrapped around my waist like a vice. Juan hauled me violently backward, his momentum carrying us both away from the crumbling edge. We hit the solid, load-bearing perimeter floor hard, Juan twisting his body mid-air to take the brutal impact of the stone against his own armored back, shielding me entirely. We slid a few feet and skidded to a halt in the suffocating cloud of dust. Silence fell over the great hall, save for the terrifying sound of loose pebbles falling into the deep dark chasm in the center of the room. I lay flat against Juan's broad chest, gasping for air. His heart was hammering against my ear, a frantic, thunderous rhythm that betrayed the absolute terror he had just felt. "Are you injured?" Juan demanded. His voice was a harsh, jagged rasp, devoid of all its usual cold authority. "I'm fine," I coughed, pushing myself up slightly to look at him. My hands were shaking, resting flat against the dark leather of his tunic. The sheer stress. They took out the pillars. If your men had stood there for 2 more minutes, they would have been crushed in the sublevel. Juan didn't look at the massive crater that had almost swallowed his army. He was looking entirely at me. His face was covered in dust, his sharp features tight with an overwhelming, consuming intensity. He reached up, his large, calloused hand gripping the back of my neck, his thumb pressing hard against my pulse point as if he needed to feel the physical proof that I was alive. "You did it again," Juan breathed, his dark eyes burning with a fierce, possessive heat that made the breath catch in my throat. "You saw the flaw. You saved my vanguard." "I am an infrastructure inspector, my lord," I whispered, the professional title sounding suddenly very small in the heavy, intimate space between us. "It is my job to find the cracks." Juan's grip tightened slightly on my neck, pulling me just a fraction of an inch closer. The air between us crackled, completely drowning out the shouts of the surviving soldiers gathering at the edges of the room. "You are not an inspector anymore, Lin Yao," the master of the siege murmured, his gaze dropping to my lips. "You are mine, and I am never letting you set foot in a hostile structure without me again." Chapter 6. The dust took a long time to settle, hanging in the cavernous great hall like a thick, choking fog. Slowly, the surviving vanguard infantry began to pick themselves up from the perimeter walls, coughing and peering in terrified awe at the massive, jagged crater that now dominated the center of the citadel. Lord Juan did not immediately let me go. He remained braced over me on the hard granite floor, his heavy armor shielding me from the settling debris. I could feel the tension radiating through his muscles, the adrenaline of the near miss keeping him perfectly, dangerously still. "My lord." General Ma's voice cut through the haze, frantic and echoing. "Commander Juan." Juan finally shifted, pushing himself up onto one knee. He reached down, his large hands gripping my waist, and effortlessly pulled me to my feet alongside him. He kept me tucked securely against his side, his dark eyes scanning my face one last time before he turned his attention to his second-in-command. "I am intact, General," Juan's voice rumbled, the cold, authoritative master of the siege instantly returning to the surface. "Secure the perimeter of the breach. No one steps within 10 feet of the sheer edge. The primary load-bearing capacity of the remaining floor is entirely compromised." He used my exact terminology without missing a beat. It sent a strange, completely inappropriate thrill straight down my spine. I pulled my charcoal stick from my belt, my hand still shaking slightly, and stepped forward to look over the edge of the abyss. Juan's hand shot out, grabbing the back of my collar before I could get too close. "What did I just say about the perimeter, Yao?" he warned softly. "I need to see the fracture lines," I insisted, leaning forward against his iron grip to peer into the dark, gaping maw of the sublevel. "General Ma, bring a torch." A soldier rushed forward, tossing a burning brand down into the darkness. It fell for what felt like an eternity before hitting the bottom with a scattering of sparks, illuminating a massive, cavernous space beneath the Great Hall. The sublevel was vast, filled with the crushed remains of the granite floor and the shattered stumps of the undermined pillars. It was a suicide trap, General Ma muttered, staring down into the pit. They meant to bury the entire Vanguard command structure. No, I said, my brow furrowing as I stared at the arrangement of the shattered pillars in the flickering torchlight. I tapped my charcoal stick rapidly against my palm. A deadfall of this magnitude, systematically undermining 24 granite support columns without collapsing the roof prematurely, requires weeks of highly specialized engineering. You don't expend that kind of effort just to kill a Vanguard. Juan looked down at me, his eyes narrowing. Then why do it? To hide something, I murmured. Look at the debris pattern. The pillars weren't knocked outward to widen the span. They were angled inward. They deliberately directed the collapse of the ceiling to bury the exact center of the sublevel. I turned to look up at Juan. They weren't trying to crush us, my lord. They were using our weight to seal the vault beneath us permanently. Juan's expression turned to ice. General, bring the heavy climbing ropes. 10 minutes later, I was descending into the abyss. I was not doing it under my own power, however. True to his terrifying promise, Juan refused to let me out of his immediate physical grasp. I was strapped securely to his chest via a heavy leather climbing harness, while the siege master rappelled us both down the jagged, unstable cliff face of the crater using a single thick hemp rope. The heat radiating from his chest was the only thing keeping the chill of the subterranean cavern at bay. He moved with absolute, predatory grace, his boots finding secure footholds in the shattered stone that my smaller frame would have struggled with. We hit the bottom with a soft crunch of debris. Juan unhooked the climbing carabiner, but he did not unbuckle the harness binding me to him. Stay behind me, he ordered, drawing his mace with one hand and taking a torch from a waiting soldier with the other. We moved toward the center of the sublevel, navigating the massive, jagged slabs of fallen granite. The air down here was stale and smelled heavily of damp earth and old iron. At the absolute center of the cavern, partially buried beneath a 60-ton slab of the fallen floor, was a massive set of reinforced bronze doors. They were buckled and dented from the collapse, but the heavy imperial locking mechanism was still intact. Bronze, I noted, shining my own lantern over the metal. Not iron. Bronze doesn't rust in damp subterranean environments. This wasn't built by the ancient mountain clans. This was built recently, and that is an imperial vault lock. Juan didn't ask if I could open it. He simply stepped up to the buckled doors, raised his heavy spiked mace, and brought it down on the complex locking mechanism with the sheer, terrifying force of a falling meteor. The bronze shattered, the gears shrieked, and the heavy doors groaned inward. Juan pushed the door open, raising his torch to illuminate the interior of the vault. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. The vault was not filled with rebel weaponry or grain or military supplies. It was stacked, floor to ceiling, with heavy, uniformly cast silver ingots. Each ingot was stamped with the dual dragon crest of the Yin dynasty's central treasury. Imperial tax silver, Juan whispered, the torchlight casting harsh, demonic shadows across his sharp face. This is the missing northern tribute, I breathed, quickly estimating the volume of the room. The northern governor claimed the transport caravans were ambushed by mountain bandits 2 years ago. He claimed the silver was lost to the river. Bandits do not build climate-controlled bronze vaults beneath ancient fortresses, Juan rumbled, his voice dropping to a lethally quiet octave. He reached out, picking up a heavy silver ingot. He turned it over in his gloved hand. The truth settled over the freezing cavern like a burial shroud. The rebels holding the Iron Citadel were not a peasant uprising. They were a heavily funded, private mercenary army bought and paid for by the northern governor himself, using stolen imperial taxes to fund a silent secession from the Yin dynasty. He undermined the floor to bury the evidence, I said, the political architecture of the treason finally making sense. If the citadel fell, he knew the imperial vanguard would find the silver and trace the embezzlement back to him. So he ordered his men to trigger the deadfall and bury it. Juan dropped the silver ingot back onto the pile. The loud clack echoed through the vault like an executioner's block. He sacrificed 3,000 of his own men in the citadel just to hide his ledger, Juan stated, the cold, unrelenting justice of the vanguard commander radiating from every inch of his massive frame. He turned away from the silver, looking down at me in the dim torchlight. The violence in his eyes was terrifying, but none of it was directed at me. "Can your engineers clear this debris, Lady Lin?" Juan asked, his voice a low, gravelly command. "Give me 3 days, 100 men, and a pulley system, and I will have every tale of this silver sitting in your courtyard." I promised, the professional defiance burning bright in my chest. A slow, dark smile curved Juan's lips. He reached out, his hand wrapping around the back of my neck, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin just beneath my jaw. 3 days, the master of the siege murmured, leaning down until his lips brushed my ear. "And then, we are going to march on the northern governor's palace. And I am going to let you tear his walls down." Chapter 7. To extract 60 tons of collapsed Ming-era granite and thousands of heavy silver ingots from a subterranean vault without compromising the rest of the citadel's floor, one does not simply use brute force. One uses a block and tackle. For 3 days, the Great Hall of the Iron Citadel was transformed from a site of near disaster into a perfectly synchronized, highly efficient extraction operation. I stood at the edge of the perimeter wall, my clean, minimalist leather tool belt strapped over my faded cotton robes, watching my newly installed system at work. I had directed the carpenters to construct a massive A-frame crane over the crater, strung with a complex network of heavy iron pulleys I had requisitioned from the siege engines. "The load is too heavy, Lady Lin," General Ma shouted over the noise, looking skeptically at the thick hemp ropes vibrating under the tension. "It will snap the main line." "It will not snap, General," I answered calmly, not taking my eyes off the rising slab of granite. The mechanical advantage of a compound pulley system is determined by the number of rope segments supporting the movable block. The equation is absolute. The effort force F required to lift the weight W is divided by the number of pulleys N. I pointed to the intricate rigging swaying above the abyss. "I have installed a 6-pulley array. The effort required by your men is exactly 1/6 of the actual weight of the stone. It isn't magic, General. It's physics." Heave! Down in the crater, the vanguard soldiers hauled on the primary line. With a slow grinding scrape, a massive slab of debris that would have normally required 200 men to shift was effortlessly hoisted into the air by a team of 30. A cheer erupted from the infantrymen as the stone was safely swung clear of the crater and lowered onto the solid floor. I let out a slow exhale, marking a neat, precise tally on my clipboard. The last of the debris was cleared. The path to the silver was entirely unobstructed. "Your men are beginning to worship you more than they worship me, Chief Engineer." I turned. Lord Juan was leaning casually against a pristine granite pillar just a few feet away. His heavy, spiked mace was sheathed, and his arms were crossed over his dark leather chest piece. He had been watching me for the past hour in complete silence, his dark eyes tracking my every movement with a heavy, consuming focus that completely ignored the bustling army around us. "I am merely saving their backs from permanent spinal compression, my lord," I replied, suppressing the sudden flutter in my stomach. Juan pushed off the pillar and walked toward me. The soldiers immediately parted, giving the terrifying master of the siege a wide berth. He stopped in front of me, entirely invading my personal space. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he reached out and handed me a delicate, unblemished porcelain cup filled with steaming jasmine tea. It was a stark, almost startling contrast to the dirt, sweat, and iron of the siege camp. "You haven't stopped to drink since sunrise," Juan rumbled softly, his gaze dropping to my chalk-stained fingers as I took the cup. "The silver is secured. The vanguard has its prize. You are allowed to breathe, Yao." The warmth of the cup seeped into my cold hands. I took a sip, the fragrant tea cutting through the dust in my throat. "The extraction is only the first variable, Commander. We still have to transport thousands of taels of silver across a mountain pass, and then we have to lay siege to the man who stole it." Juan's expression hardened at the mention of the northern governor, the cold executioner instantly returning to the surface. The governor resides in the Jade Water Palace. It is located in the center of the deep valley, surrounded on all 4 sides by a massive, artificial moat fed by the river. It is completely inaccessible to my trebuchets and battering rams. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a dark, conspiratorial octave. "My generals believe we must construct a fleet of pontoon barges to cross the water under heavy arrow fire. The casualty rate will be catastrophic." I lowered my teacup, my mind instantly discarding the pontoon strategy. Constructing barges under fire was a mathematical nightmare with a virtually guaranteed failure rate. "You don't need boats, Juan," I said, looking up into his lethal waiting eyes. "A moat is only a defense if the water remains inside it. A slow, deeply dangerous smile spread across the siege master's face. Explain. If the palace is in a valley and the moat is fed by a river, then the water level is artificially maintained by a series of retaining walls and locks, I explained, my fingers itching for my charcoal stick. Fluid dynamics are merciless. If we march upstream and shatter the primary retaining lock holding the river back, the river diverts back to its natural course, Juan finished, the brilliant brutality of the strategy clicking into place. And the moat drains. Exactly, I said, a fierce grin mirroring his own. We don't cross the water. We simply pull the plug. Your vanguard will march right up to his front gates on dry mud. Juan stared at me, the sheer, overwhelming reverence in his eyes making my breath hitch. He didn't care that I was covered in masonry dust or that my hands were calloused from gripping iron tools. He looked at me as if I were the most devastating weapon he had ever laid eyes on. He reached out, his leather-clad thumb gently brushing a streak of soot from my cheek. My generals spend weeks calculating how to die crossing a moat, Juan whispered, his voice vibrating with a terrifying possessive pride. And my chief engineer drains it in 3 seconds. He stepped back, turning his lethal focus toward the cavernous doors of the great hall. General Ma, Juan's voice thundered, echoing off the high stone ceilings. Load the silver into the heavy transport wagons. Break camp. We march north within the hour to dry out a palace. Chapter 8. The march to the northern province was brutal, but the vanguard moved with the terrifying speed of an army that had just realized it was invincible. We arrived at the ridge overlooking the Jade Water Palace just as the sun began to set on the 5th day. I stood at the edge of the cliff, looking down into the valley through a brass spyglass. The northern governor had built himself a fortress of absolute luxury. The palace was a sprawling complex of white marble and green glazed tiles, sitting arrogantly on an island in the exact center of a massive deep-water moat. The walls were high, lined with archers, and the only bridge connecting the island to the mainland had already been drawn up and destroyed. He thinks he is untouchable, Juan said, stepping up beside me on the ridge. The wind whipped his dark wolf fur cloak around his broad shoulders. He looked down at the sprawling moat with absolute disgust. He stole the emperor's silver to build a monument to his own greed, and he is hiding behind a wall of water. Water is heavy, Commander, I murmured, lowering the spyglass. 1 cubic foot of water weighs approximately 62 pounds. He is using millions of pounds of it as a shield. But that much weight requires absolute structural perfection to contain. I turned, unrolling a topographic map of the valley onto a flat boulder. I weighed the corners down with iron pitons. The river feeds the moat from the north elevation, I said, tracing the blue ink line with my charcoal. But to keep the moat from overflowing and flooding his own palace, the water must cycle out. There has to be a drainage lock on the southern, lowest elevation of the outer wall. Juan leaned over the map, his armor brushing against my shoulder. If we destroy the drainage lock, the water empties into the lower valley. Yes, but we cannot just hit it with a trebuchet, I warned, looking up at him. The lock will be submerged. A flaming payload will extinguish, and a solid boulder will lose its kinetic velocity the moment it hits the water's surface. Juan's brow furrowed. Then how do we shatter a submerged lock? We don't attack the lock from the outside, I said, tapping the charcoal against the map. We attack it from the inside. We use the hydrostatic pressure of his own moat against him. I pulled a blank sheet of parchment from my satchel and quickly sketched a cross-section of the southern retaining wall. The pressure exerted by a static fluid increases linearly with depth, governed by the equation of hydrostatic pressure, I explained, writing the variables neatly beside the sketch. The deepest part of the moat is at the absolute base of the retaining wall. That is where the water pressure is the most violent, pushing outward against the stone. I looked up, meeting his dark, intense gaze. We don't need to break the entire wall. We just need to create a tiny microscopic fracture at the very bottom. The immense water pressure will do the rest. It will force its way into the crack, widen it, and violently tear the wall apart from the inside out. Juan stared at the physics, the lethal strategist in him instantly visualizing the destruction. How do we create the initial fracture at the bottom of a 20-foot deep moat? We give them a present, I said, a dark smile touching my lips. We need a heavy iron diving bell sealed with pitch. We pack it with our black powder, but instead of a standard fuse we use a chemical delay. We drop it into the moat upstream in the dead of night. The current will carry it down to the southern retaining wall. When the chemical fuse breaches, it creates a concussive shockwave underwater. Juan's eyes widened slightly, the sheer brilliance of the trap taking his breath away. A shockwave that strikes the base of the wall. Exactly, I confirmed. The blast won't break the stone, but it will crack the mortar. And then, the governor's own moat will tear his palace walls down for us. Juan slowly stood up straight. He looked out over the valley, at the pristine, arrogant palace sitting in its protective lake. Then he looked down at me. The fierce, possessive pride in his eyes was blinding. "I have spent my life tearing down walls with iron and blood," Juan whispered, his voice rough and heavy with an emotion that had nothing to do with war. He reached out, his large hands gripping my waist, pulling me firmly against his armored chest. "And you tear them down with chalk and water." He didn't care that his generals were standing 50 yards away. He didn't care that we were standing on a hostile ridge. Juan lowered his head and kissed me. A hard, desperate clash of heat and certainty that sent a shockwave straight through my chest, entirely overriding the cold mountain wind. "Build your diving bell, Lin Yao," the siege master commanded against my lips, his breath hot against my skin. "Let's drown a traitor." Chapter 9. The deployment of the diving bell was a masterclass in silent, lethal logistics. Under the cover of a moonless night, Lord Juan's elite infiltrators hauled the heavy, pitch-sealed iron sphere upstream. They slipped it quietly into the freezing current of the river that fed the Jade Water Palace's moat. I stood on the high ridge overlooking the valley, a small, intricate water clock resting on the flat boulder beside my maps. Lord Juan stood immediately behind me, his heavy cloak wrapped completely around both of us to block the biting mountain wind. His large hands rested securely on my hips, grounding me as we waited in the absolute dark. "The current is moving at approximately 4 feet per second, I whispered, my eyes fixed on the dripping mechanism of the water clock. "The chemical fuse is calibrated to breach the seal in exactly 17 minutes. That gives the bell enough time to drift directly to the base of the southern retaining wall before detonation." Juan's chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm against my back. "And if it detonates early? Then we blow up a lot of innocent river trout, and I will have to recalculate the pitch-to-sulfur ratio," I replied, my voice tense. The final drop of water fell from the upper chamber of the clock. 17 minutes. For a long, agonizing second, the valley remained completely silent. The pristine palace sat peacefully in the center of its dark, glassy lake, completely unaware of the physics currently churning beneath the surface. Then we felt it. It wasn't an explosion. It was a deep, resonant thump that vibrated through the granite ridge directly into the soles of our boots. Down in the valley, the surface of the moat violently shuddered. A massive bubble of displaced air erupted near the southern wall, breaking the glassy surface with a loud, chaotic splash. "The concussive wave hit the stone," I breathed, gripping the edge of the boulder. Now we let Torricelli's law do the heavy lifting. With a hairline fracture introduced at the absolute base of the retaining wall, the hydrostatic pressure of the 20-foot deep moat found its escape route. The velocity of the escaping fluid, governed by Torricelli's law, was catastrophic. The water did not just leak. It forced its way into the cracked mortar like a wedge of solid iron. A high-pitched, terrifying groan echoed up the valley walls. It was the sound of a structural failure on a massive scale. Suddenly, the entire southern retaining wall violently blew outward. Millions of gallons of dark water surged into the lower, uninhabited basin of the valley with a deafening roar. The moat didn't just drain. It violently evacuated. Within 10 minutes, the protective lake surrounding the Jade Water Palace had completely vanished, leaving behind a massive, impassable expanse of thick, sucking river mud. The drawbridge, previously the only way to reach the island, now hung ridiculously over a field of wet sludge. The palace was completely exposed. Juan stepped back, the lethal energy of the siege master radiating off him in waves. He turned to General Ma, who was staring down at the empty moat in absolute awe. "Dismantle the non-essential siege engines," Juan commanded, his voice a dark, booming rumble. "Lay the timber across the mud to create a stable infantry approach. We breach the palace before the governor even realizes his moat is gone." By dawn, a wide, solid wooden causeway had been laid across the drained lakebed. The vanguard did not bother with ladders or battering rams. Juan marched directly up to the grand, intricately carved mahogany doors of the palace and shattered the main lock with a single devastating swing of his mace. The palace guards, expecting to fight off a fleet of barges over water, were entirely unprepared for 10,000 heavy infantrymen pouring through their front doors on foot. The surrender was immediate and absolute. I followed Juan into the grand foyer of the palace, stepping over the discarded swords of the mercenaries. The interior was sickeningly opulent, lined with gold leaf, imported silk tapestries, and flawless jade statues, all paid for with the stolen northern tribute. The northern governor was cowering at the top of a grand marble staircase, surrounded by Juan's guards. He was a plump, terrified man in sleepwear, entirely stripped of the arrogance that had driven him to treason. "You cannot do this," the governor shrieked as Juan approached the base of the stairs. "I am a provincial lord. I demand an audience with the emperor." "You will have your audience," Juan stated, his voice a glacier of cold, unyielding authority. "On the executioner's block. Where is the rest of the imperial silver?" "I don't know what you are talking about," the governor lied desperately. "The silver was lost to bandits." "You have no proof." Juan didn't argue. He slowly turned his head to look at me, a dark, expectant smile playing on his lips. I unclasped my iron mallet from my belt and walked slowly around the grand foyer. I ignored the terrified governor and focused entirely on the architecture. I stopped in front of a massive, load-bearing marble column near the entryway. I tapped the marble with my mallet. It rang solid. I moved to the next column. Solid. I moved to a third, slightly wider column tucked awkwardly near the eastern corridor. I tapped it. Ping. The sound was hollow. "This is an Ionic-style column, my lord," I said, pointing the mallet at the stone. "It is designed to support immense vertical loads. However, the fluting on this specific pillar is completely decorative, and it is located on a non-bearing axis. It isn't holding the ceiling up. It's a hollow vault." Juan raised his mace. The vanguard guards quickly stepped back. He drove the spiked head of the weapon directly into the center of the marble column. The false stone shattered, revealing a massive hidden cache of stamped imperial silver ingots, stacked neatly alongside highly detailed, encrypted ledgers. The governor collapsed onto the stairs, sobbing. The undeniable proof of his treason had just fallen out of his own walls. Juan looked at the shattered column, then back at me. He sheathed his mace, ignoring the screaming traitor and the fortune in silver. He walked across the marble floor, entirely unfazed by the chaos of the raid, and stopped directly in front of me. "You are officially forbidden from ever leaving my vanguard, Lin Yao," Juan whispered, the sheer, possessive pride in his dark eyes making the massive marble foyer feel incredibly small. Chapter 10. The return to the imperial capital was not a quiet affair. Lord Juan's vanguard marched through the main gates followed by a train of heavily guarded wagons carrying the recovered northern tribute. The emperor's court was thrown into absolute chaos. 2 high-ranking governors had been exposed for monumental treason. A rebel uprising had been crushed, and a fortune in stolen taxes had been returned to the treasury. And according to the master of the siege, it had all been accomplished by a disgraced masonry inspector. I stood in the center of the imperial throne room, having finally bathed and changed out of my faded cotton work robes into a formal, though severely tailored dark blue silk tunic. Lord Juan stood beside me, immaculate in his crimson-trimmed dark armor, an immovable, terrifying mountain of support. The emperor sat on his jade throne, slowly turning the pages of the detailed structural reports and hydrostatic calculations I had provided. "You burned the iron citadel's gates using a chemical reaction," the emperor murmured, his sharp eyes scanning the equations. "You discovered a deadfall trap using mortar fissures. And you drained a moat by weaponizing fluid dynamics. The principles of architecture and physics are absolute, Your Majesty," I replied, keeping my posture perfectly straight. "Treason, however, is structurally flawed. It always leaves a stress fracture." The emperor closed the report, looking down at me for a very long, heavy moment. "Your father, the grand architect, was executed for the southern bridge collapse," the emperor stated quietly. "A collapse caused by the southern governor substituting river clay for fired bricks to steal the construction funds," Juan interjected, his voice a low, warning rumble that echoed through the silent hall. "The same governor who was hiding the stolen tea in the Pearl River ports. Lady Lin's father was murdered to cover a thief's tracks." The emperor nodded slowly. "It appears the imperial court owes the Lin family a profound apology, and a substantial debt." The emperor stood up. The entire court immediately fell to their knees. I dropped to the jade floor, but Juan simply bowed his head, retaining his vanguard privilege. "Lin Yao," the emperor's voice rang out with absolute authority. Your family's nobility is fully restored. The stain upon your father's name is wiped from the imperial records. Furthermore, I am officially appointing you to the position of Grand Imperial Architect. The Ministry of Public Works is yours to command. I closed my eyes, a massive, overwhelming wave of relief crashing over me. The years of disgrace, the hollow tapping in abandoned wings, the sneers of the minor guilds, it was all finally erased. However, the Emperor continued, a faint, amused smile touching his lips. Lord Huan has made it violently clear that if I attempt to reassign you permanently to the ministry, he will march the vanguard on my own palace. Therefore, you will hold a dual commission. You are the Grand Architect of the Empire, and the Chief Engineer of the siege. I accept, Your Majesty, I said, my voice thick with emotion. 3 months later, my new architectural studio was located within the heavily fortified walls of the Vanguard's Central Command. It was a massive, brilliantly lit pavilion filled with towering drafting tables, intricate wooden models of bridges and fortresses, and endless racks of premium vellum. I stood over a massive blueprint of the capital's aqueduct system, using a brass compass to calculate the flow rate for a new distribution channel. The heavy oak doors of the pavilion opened, but I didn't need to look up to know who it was. The sudden heavy silence that fell over my assistants, followed by their rapid, completely unnecessary departure from the room, was the only announcement Lord Huan ever needed. I felt the heat of his presence before his heavy arms wrapped securely around my waist from behind. He pulled my back flush against his broad chest, burying his face in the crook of my neck. He let out a long, heavy sigh, the tension of the imperial court melting away the moment he touched me. The Minister of Revenue is an idiot, Huan rumbled against my skin, his breath sending a shiver down my spine. He wants to build a new defensive wall along the eastern trade route, and he wants to use limestone. Limestone is too porous for the eastern humidity, I murmured, leaning back into his embrace, my hands coming to rest over his heavily scarred forearms. It will crumble in a decade. Tell him to use granite, or I will personally go to the ministry and hit him with my mallet. Huan chuckled, a dark, rich sound that vibrated through my chest. I already told him, and I informed him that if he attempts to override your material requisition, I will test a new trebuchet payload on his carriage. He turned me in his arms, lifting me effortlessly so I sat on the edge of the drafting table, right on top of the aqueduct blueprints. The sheer, overwhelming size of him was completely at odds with the profound, terrifying gentleness in his dark eyes when he looked at me. You have been drafting for 8 hours, Yao, Huan whispered, his hands resting heavily on my thighs. The aqueducts are inefficient, I argued half-heartedly, sliding my hands up to rest on his broad shoulders. The water pressure in the lower districts is. The aqueducts will not collapse tonight, Huan interrupted, leaning in until our lips were mere inches apart. The scent of cold iron, pine, and leather completely surrounded me. But my patience has reached its absolute structural limit. I smiled, a fierce, unapologetic warmth blooming in my chest. Then you had better relieve the tension, Commander. Huan didn't need further permission. He kissed me, a deep, consuming, devastating collision of heat and certainty that entirely broke my concentration. He kissed me like a man who had spent his life tearing the world apart, only to finally find the one person who knew exactly how to build it back together. As I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling the terrifying master of the siege closer, I knew my calculations were completely flawless. The foundation we had built was absolute, and this was one structure that would never, ever fall. Chapter 11. The problem with being the Grand Imperial Architect and simultaneously holding the heart of the Master of the Siege was that the line between imperial infrastructure and military jurisdiction had become entirely, hopelessly blurred. It was the height of the monsoon season. The rain was battering the glass windows of my pavilion in the Vanguard Command compound. I was hunched over my drafting table, desperately trying to ignore the massive, heavily armored distraction currently pacing behind me. If the Ministry of Finance rejects your budget for the aqueduct reinforcement one more time, Lord Huan rumbled, his voice a dark, lethal hum over the sound of the rain, I am going to take a battering ram to the treasury doors. You cannot besiege the accountants, Huan, I sighed, rubbing my temples. Besides, I already found a loophole in the imperial tax code. I reclassified the aqueduct stones as strategic defensive barriers. They have to approve it. Huan stopped pacing. I felt the familiar, intoxicating heat of him a second before his hands came to rest on my waist. He leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to the curve of my neck. You are a terrifyingly deceitful woman, Lin Yao. I am an engineer, I corrected, leaning back into his solid chest. I simply optimized the available resources. Before Juan could offer a thoroughly distracting rebuttal, the heavy oak doors of the pavilion burst open. Lieutenant General Ma stood in the doorway, soaked to the bone, his dark armor dripping rainwater onto my pristine floorboards. He took one look at the siege master's hands on my waist and immediately fixed his eyes firmly on the ceiling. Apologies, Commander. Grand Architect. Ma shouted over a crack of thunder. We have an infrastructure emergency. The Grand Canal locks at the southern gorge are failing. The lockmaster sent a distress raven 10 minutes ago. He says the gates are shaking themselves apart. I froze. The Grand Canal locks at the southern gorge were not just any infrastructure. They were my father's final masterpiece. The Imperial engineers had maintained them perfectly for a decade. Are the river levels exceeding the load capacity? I demanded, instantly pulling away from Juan and grabbing my heavy leather satchel. No, my lady, Ma replied, stepping aside as Juan threw a heavy, fur-lined oilcloth cloak over my shoulders. The water levels are high, but within normal monsoon parameters. The lockmaster says it's the wind and the tidal surges. They are hitting the gates in a rhythm, and the iron is shrieking. Rhythm? I whispered, the blood turning to ice in my veins. It's not a static load failure. It's a dynamic oscillation. Juan didn't ask questions. He didn't ask for a drawn-out explanation. He simply strapped his heavy spiked mace to his belt and turned to Ma. Ready the vanguard's fast response cavalry. We ride for the gorge. The ride was a blinding, freezing nightmare of mud and rain. Juan kept my horse tethered closely to his massive warhorse, his dark eyes constantly scanning the treacherous terrain to ensure I didn't slip. When we reached the southern gorge, the sound was deafening. The Grand Canal was a roaring torrent of brown water, and the massive 50-foot iron and ironwood lock gates were taking the absolute brunt of it. But they weren't just holding back water. A freak wind tunnel created by the gorge was driving massive, rhythmic tidal surges against the gates. Every 6 seconds a wave slammed into the iron, and with every impact, the massive gates shuddered violently, bowing inward and then snapping back. The Imperial Lockmaster ran up to us, terrified and soaked. Grand Architect. We tried to reinforce the hinges with heavy chains, but the chains are snapping like twigs. The mortar in the granite frame is cracking. I didn't answer him. I sprinted toward the edge of the stone embankment, completely ignoring the spray of the freezing river. Juan was instantly beside me, his large hand gripping the back of my belt to anchor me against the gale force winds. I pulled my charcoal and a wax-coated slate from my satchel. My mind instantly stripped away the rain, the fear and the noise, leaving only the pure, terrifying syntax of the physics. The structural displacement X of the gates isn't failing because of the water's weight, I shouted to Juan over the roar of the canal. It's a driven harmonic oscillator. I furiously wrote out the second-order linear differential equation on the slate. The tidal surges are the driving force, I explained, pointing to the variables. The wind is pushing the waves at a specific cyclical frequency. It just happens to perfectly match the natural frequency of these gates. When the driving frequency matches the natural frequency, the amplitude of the structure's oscillation increases exponentially. Juan stared at the massive, groaning iron gates. Resonance. Yes, I yelled. The system lacks sufficient damping. The gates are literally storing the kinetic energy of every wave. If we don't break the resonance in the next 10 minutes, we hit a singular point of structural failure. The iron will violently shatter, and the gorge will flood the lower valley, drowning 10,000 people. How do we break the resonance? Juan demanded, his voice a booming anchor of absolute calm in the storm. We cannot stop the wind. We can't change the driving frequency omega, but we can change the natural frequency of the system. I wiped the rain from my eyes, looking frantically around the gorge. We need to alter the mass m of the gates, or introduce a massive damping coefficient C to disrupt the waveform before it hits the iron. I looked upstream. About 50 yards from the gates, the gorge narrowed slightly, flanked by towering, unstable limestone cliffs. Juan! I grabbed his armored arm. If we drop a mass into the river upstream, it will act as a breakwater. It will disrupt the uniform wave pattern and scatter the driving frequency. The master of the siege followed my gaze to the cliffs. He didn't hesitate. He turned to his vanguard cavalry, who were waiting in perfect, disciplined formation despite the raging storm. General Ma. Huan roared, drawing his heavy mace. "Dismount the cavalry. Bring the heavy siege cables and the grappling hooks." Within seconds, 50 shadow guards had scaled the slippery limestone cliffs overlooking the narrow point of the river. "Where Yao?" Huan asked, standing right beside me at the edge of the roaring water. "Tell me exactly where to break the stone." I calculated the velocity of the water and the required distance to scatter the waveform. 30 yards upstream. Target the primary fault line on the eastern overhang. Huan signaled his men. The vanguard drove their heavy iron grappling hooks deep into the limestone fissures I had identified. They linked the heavy siege cables to their warhorses on the embankment. "Pull," Huan commanded. 50 heavy warhorses surged forward. The heavy cables pulled taut, shrieking against the rain. For a terrifying moment the cliff held. Then with a sound like a thunderclap the fault line gave way. A massive 100-ton slab of limestone sheared off the cliff face and plummeted directly into the raging river. The impact sent a geyser of water 100 feet into the air. The massive boulder wedged itself perfectly into the narrowest part of the gorge. It didn't stop the river, but it completely shattered the cyclical rhythm of the tidal surges. The uniform waves broke against the fallen limestone, turning into chaotic, turbulent whitewater rapids. I held my breath, staring at the iron gates. The next surge of water hit the gates, but the rhythmic 6-second pounding was gone. The driving frequency had been violently decoupled from the structure's natural frequency. The massive iron doors let out one final, agonizing groan and then they settled. The violent shuddering stopped. The exponential amplitude died out, dampened by the chaotic water. They held. My father's locks held. The lockmaster fell to his knees in the mud, weeping with relief. The vanguard soldiers let out a ragged cheer that was instantly swallowed by the storm. I dropped my slate, my entire body shaking as the adrenaline abruptly crashed. The wind whipped my wet hair across my face, but before I could even take a step back from the embankment, Huan caught me. He pulled me flush against his heavy armor, wrapping his oilcloth cloak entirely around me to shield me from the freezing rain. He buried his face in my wet hair, his chest heaving with deep, ragged breaths. "You saved the valley," Huan breathed, his voice vibrating against my ear. "You saved your father's legacy." "I just did the math, Commander," I whispered, wrapping my arms tightly around his waist, burying my face in the cold iron of his chest piece. "You threw a mountain into a river for me." Huan pulled back just enough to look down at me. The storm was raging around us, but his dark, lethal eyes were filled with an absolute, burning devotion that eclipsed the entire world. "I would tear the sky down if your equations required it, Yao," he murmured. He didn't care about the rain or the lockmaster, or the 50 vanguard soldiers watching their terrifying commander acting completely, hopelessly smitten. He cupped my face in his large, calloused hands and kissed me. A deep, fierce, uncompromising claim that felt exactly like coming home. The infrastructure of the Yan dynasty was vast, decaying, and constantly under threat. But as long as I had my chalk, and the master of the siege had my back, there was absolutely nothing we couldn't brace, reinforce, and conquer. Chapter 12. My private quarters within the Vanguard compound had been entirely redesigned to my exact specifications. I had stripped away the heavy, oppressive tapestries of the previous occupants, favoring clean, minimalist lines of pale bamboo and unvarnished cedar. Outside my open window, the soft, pastel pink petals of an early blooming plum tree drifted through the crisp mountain air, casting delicate shadows across my pristine drafting table. It was a quiet, perfectly ordered sanctuary hidden in the very center of the Emperor's war machine. I was currently staring at a formal imperial edict written on heavy gold-flecked silk. I had read it 3 times, and with every pass my irritation compounded. "Is there an error in the structural budget, my lady?" Jian and I, my newly appointed head scribe, asked nervously from the doorway. "It isn't a budget, Jian," I sighed, dropping the heavy silk scroll onto my desk. "It is a betrothal petition. The Emperor, in his infinite meddling wisdom, has decided that an unmarried grand architect is a political vulnerability. He is attempting to officially betroth me to Minister Zhang of the Outer Provinces." Jian's eyes widened. "Minister Zhang? But he is a scholar of poetry. He faints at the sight of unpolished brass. He is a calm, predictable, highly manageable asset," I corrected dryly, leaning back in my chair. "The Emperor knows I hold the blueprints to every fortress in the Yan dynasty. He wants to anchor my loyalty by marrying me into a thoroughly boring, docile family. It is a textbook containment strategy." "And what does the master of the siege have to say about this containment strategy?" Jian and I asked, a distinctly terrified smile touching her lips. "Lord Huan has been drilling the heavy infantry on the northern ridge for the past 3 days," I said, picking up my charcoal stick to casually correct a stress load error on an unrelated bridge schematic. "He hasn't seen the edict." The words had barely left my mouth when the heavy wooden doors of my pavilion did not just open, they were violently thrown wide. Lord Huan strode into my minimalist sanctuary like a storm of dark iron in absolute fury. He was still wearing his heavy combat armor, covered in the dust of the northern ridge. He didn't look at Jian and I, who wisely squeaked, bowed and immediately fled the room. Huan marched directly to my drafting table. He slammed a crumpled, identical copy of the gold-flecked imperial edict down onto the bamboo surface. "Minister Zhang," Huan rumbled, his voice dropping to a terrifying, lethal octave that vibrated the inkstones on my desk. "The Emperor wishes to hand my chief engineer over to a man who writes sonnets about the autumn wind." "It is a logical political maneuver, Commander," I replied, fighting the urge to smile at the sheer, possessive rage radiating from him. "Minister Zhang is mathematically harmless. The Emperor is simply trying to minimize variables." "I am going to minimize Minister Zhang," Huan stated, resting his heavily gauntlet hands on my desk, leaning forward until his sharp face was inches from mine. "I am going to march the vanguard to his ancestral manor and dismantle it brick by brick until he publicly retracts his name from this petition." "You cannot lay siege to a poet, Huan," I pointed out softly. "I can," Huan countered, his dark eyes locking onto mine, burning with a fierce, unapologetic heat. "And I will. You are not a political asset to be managed, Lin Yao. You are the architect who breaks mountains. You belong on the front lines. With me." He reached into the heavy leather pouch at his belt and pulled out a scroll. It wasn't silk or gold-flecked. It was drawn on heavy, durable engineering vellum. He unrolled it over the Emperor's betrothal edict. I looked down at the drafting paper. It wasn't a military schematic. It was a contract. Specifically, it was a legally binding, impeccably structured marriage contract, written entirely in the stark, uncompromising syntax of a military alliance. "I am not a poet," Huan whispered, his voice losing its harsh edge, entirely softening as he looked down at me. "I do not know how to write flowery vows, Yao, but I know how to hold a line. I know how to reinforce a foundation, and I know that I would burn this entire empire to the ground before I let anyone else claim you." I traced the dark, rapid strokes of his handwriting. He had listed my unhindered authority over the Vanguard's engineering core, a lifetime guarantee of unlimited iron and timber requisitions, and a final, heavily underlined clause stating that the master of the siege would eternally submit to the structural authority of the Grand Architect. It was the most romantic thing I had ever read. I looked up at him. The terrifying executioner of the Yin dynasty was standing in my pastel sunlit room, offering me a lifetime of absolute, unwavering loyalty. "Your contract is lacking a crucial variable, Commander," I murmured, picking up my charcoal stick. Huan's jaw tightened slightly. "What is missing?" "The absolute value equation," I replied softly. I leaned over the vellum, drawing 2 vertical lines around our names at the bottom of the contract. Divides x divides. No matter what direction the force is applied, no matter how negative the surrounding circumstances become, the value of the contents within these brackets remains absolute and entirely unbreakable. I signed my name with a sharp, decisive flourish directly beside his. I dropped the charcoal and stood up. I didn't wait for him to process the math. I reached up, sliding my hands around the cold iron of his neck guard, and pulled him down. Huan caught me instantly, his heavy arms wrapping around my waist, lifting me off the floor as his mouth crashed down on mine. The kiss was a devastating, perfect collision of heat and gravity. It wasn't a gentle, polite promise of the imperial court. It was a fierce, consuming vow forged in siege fire and solid granite. He pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against mine, his breathing ragged, a dark, incredibly proud smile spreading across his sharp features. "I will inform the Emperor that his containment strategy has officially failed," Huan murmured against my lips, his thumb gently stroking my cheek. "Tell him the Vanguard's infrastructure is perfectly secure," I whispered, wrapping my arms tighter around his broad shoulders, "and that the chief engineer has officially balanced the equation. The Yin dynasty would continue to build walls, and there would always be men who thought they could hide their corruption behind heavy stone and thick iron. But as I stood in the sunlight, held securely in the arms of the man who had laid siege to my heart and won, I knew our foundation was flawless. Let the empire build its fortresses. We would always know exactly how to bring them down. Chapter 13. The fundamental problem with entering a legally binding marriage contract with the master of the siege was that workplace tension had taken on an entirely literal, highly destructive meaning. It had been 6 months since I signed the Vanguard Alliance, and my husband was currently attempting to drive me mathematically insane. I stood at the edge of the Vanguard's primary training courtyard, my hands planted firmly on my hips as I stared at the shattered remains of a fully reinforced masonry arch. I had designed and built that arch exactly 2 weeks ago specifically for heavy cavalry drills. It was now reduced to a pile of expensive powdered limestone and splintered pine. I pulled my slate from my satchel, furiously mapping the lateral and vertical forces that had caused the collapse using my newly developed dual-axis structural theorem. To ensure the arch's stability, I mapped the stress field as a complex function Fz equals U, xy, plus 4xy, where U represented the primary compressive load on the vertical axis, and V represented the lateral shear force. For the stone to hold without fracturing under the cavalry's weight, the stress distribution had to remain continuous and perfectly balanced. The internal forces had to satisfy strict equilibrium conditions, which I defined on my slate as, if the forces do not balance across both axes, I muttered to myself, aggressively stabbing my charcoal against the slate to underline the equations, the structural function becomes non-analytic. The masonry enters a state of catastrophic singularity. The load path fails, and I am left looking at a pile of rocks. They are very efficiently crushed rocks, Yao. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The heavy measured thud of armored boots and the sudden, overwhelming scent of cold iron and pine announced Lord Juan's arrival perfectly. The master of the siege stepped up beside me. He was wearing his dark leather training tunic, his broad shoulders relaxed, a heavy wooden practice maul resting casually over his shoulder. He looked down at the ruined arch with a profound, completely unrepentant sense of satisfaction. I explicitly stated in the design ledger that this arch was rated for a standard heavy cavalry charge, Commander, I said, tapping my charcoal against my slate. Standard, meaning horses and riders. Not whatever siege monstrosity you just drove through it. Juan chuckled, a dark, low rumble that instantly made my treacherous heart skip a beat. The heavy infantry needed to practice deploying the new mobile iron rams. Your arch presented a highly realistic obstacle. It was a load-bearing training structure, Juan. I huffed, turning to glare up at him. Do you have any idea how much effort it takes to calculate the load vectors for this specific type of limestone? You have entirely breached the terms of our marriage contract. Section 4, Clause 2. The commander will not deliberately destroy the Grand Architect's localized infrastructure without prior written notice. I gave you notice, Juan countered smoothly, leaning his practice maul against a nearby weapon rack. I mentioned over breakfast that I was going to test the limits of the men today. Testing the limits of your men does not mathematically equate to pulverizing my architecture. Juan didn't argue. He never did when I was ranting about physics. He simply watched me with that terrifying heavy intensity, his dark eyes tracking the angry flush on my cheeks. He stepped completely into my personal space, effortlessly plucking the heavy slate and charcoal from my hands and tossing them onto a nearby bench. The architecture can be rebuilt, Chief Engineer, Juan murmured. He reached out, his large hands settling firmly on my waist, pulling me flush against the hard, unyielding wall of his chest. But my heavy infantry needed to know that no structure in this empire is safe from them. You are a menace to imperial property, I whispered, though my voice had lost entirely all of its administrative authority. I rested my hands flat against his dark leather tunic, feeling the steady, heavy thumping of his heart. I am the Emperor's executioner, Juan corrected softly, leaning down until his lips were a breath away from my ear. And you are the brilliant, terrifying woman who agreed to marry him. The property damage was always going to be an unavoidable variable. He kissed the sensitive skin just beneath my jaw, a deliberate, devastatingly effective tactic designed entirely to derail my train of thought. A shiver shot straight down my spine, my fingers instinctively curling into the leather of his tunic. You still owe the Ministry of Public Works an apology, I managed to say, though my breath hitched as his thumb traced the curve of my spine. And you are paying for the new limestone out of the Vanguard's discretionary budget. Juan pulled back just enough to look down at me, a fiercely proud, predatory smile breaking across his sharp features. He knew exactly how much he affected me, and he weaponized it with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to his sieges. "Take whatever you need from the treasury, Yao," the siege master whispered, his gaze dropping to my lips. "Consider it a permanent investment in our localized infrastructure." He captured my mouth in a slow, deep, consuming kiss that entirely shattered whatever remaining annoyance I held. It was a kiss that perfectly satisfied every equation I could possibly write. A flawless, balanced equilibrium of heat, gravity, and absolute devotion. I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him closer, deciding that the complex stress fields of the masonry could wait until tomorrow. The master of the siege had broken my arch, but as his arms locked securely around me in the sunlight of the training yard, I knew with absolute certainty that this was one partnership that would never, ever collapse.